When the officers entered the bedroom, the smell of menstrual blood was already noticeable in the hallway. On the floor lay the body of a mature woman. Nearby, on the bedspread, lay a knife, partially wrapped in lace lingerie. Her lover sat against the wall, bloodstains on her legs and arms, whispering under her breath, "I loved her, only her." Marlene Brown and Tony Stanton met in 1997 in Springfield, Oregon. Both women were divorced, childless, and lived in neighboring homes in a single-story residential neighborhood. Marlene worked as a pharmacist in a hospital pharmacy, and Tony as a technician at an elementary school. Both led secluded lives and gradually bonded over shared interests, gardening, hiking, and shopping at the farmer's market. By 2001, their interactions had become regular. They began celebrating holidays together, going on day trips, and regularly spending the night at each other's homes. Neighbors and colleagues described them as an inseparable pair of friends. Confiscated photographs and video footage confirmed the existence of strong social ties and a significant amount of time spent together. In 2005, Tanya's mother died. The loss coincided with an increased emotional involvement from Marlene, who provided significant support, accompanying him to medical appointments, assisting with funeral arrangements, and spending nights at Tanya's home. During this same period, regular cohabitation began. The women would alternate staying with each other for several days at a time. Based on an analysis of email correspondence and recovered message texts, the investigation established a gradual escalation of emotional dependence between them. The tone of their communications during this period changed. Messages began to include phrases suggesting physical and emotional affection. Joint purchases of personal hygiene products, bedding, and intimate accessories were also discovered. The summer of 2006 saw a shift toward closer contact. The women shared a bed, maintained a joint budget, stored clothes in the same closet, and divided up household chores. Analysis of bank transaction data and cash register receipts confirmed shared spending patterns typical of a household. Groceries, detergents, personal care products, candles, and underwear. Based on testimony from neighbors and colleagues, as well as visual evidence from a 2007 vacation in Utah, investigators concluded that the women had an intimate relationship. Investigators obtained photographs documenting physical intimacy and their time together in private settings. Cameras containing explicit images were found in their homes, confirming the consensual nature of the physical encounter. By the end of 2007, the women began to be perceived as a stable couple. In the neighborhood where they lived, Marlene and Tony made no secret of their relationship, shared a household, and shared transportation. Their neighbors noted that the women were known for public displays of affection, which were received with restraint, but without overt condemnation. The internal dynamics of this relationship remained confidential until the investigation began. However, the case materials collected during the investigation revealed that by early 2008, the relationship had acquired a persistent sexual component. This is confirmed by personal entries recorded in paper diaries found in Marlene's home, as well as technical data obtained from digital devices. Signs of an informal monogamous agreement between the women were also identified. Their behavior, lifestyle, and shared living arrangements were consistent with a long-term emotional and physical partnership. No episodes of overt conflict or violence were recorded during this phase of the relationship. However, it was at this stage that the conditions for further escalation began to emerge: emotional isolation, jealousy, control, and boundary violations, which will be the subject of subsequent chapters. Beginning in early 2008, the relationship between Marlene Brown and Tanya Stanton began to expand beyond a domestic partnership and took on the characteristics of a deep emotional dependence with elements of control. According to the investigative analysis, changes in both women's behavior were observed: regular checkups, restrictions on personal space, and an increase in ritualized forms of intimate interaction. Marlene began to exhibit signs of obsession. According to data collected from her cell phone, she sent Tony between 8 and 25 messages daily, primarily in the evenings and at night. The messages covered topics such as location, clothing, food, and intimate details. The texts indicate that their intimate activity had acquired a regular pattern, and any deviation from this pattern was viewed by one party as a threat to stability. Based on interrogations and examination of diary entries, it was established that the women had established a series of regular evening practices, including physical intimacy, shared hygiene procedures, and role-playing elements that did not go beyond the agreed-upon activities. Marlene recorded these episodes in writing, noting the date, time, and emotional state. These entries became part of the evidence. One fragment describes a systematic pattern. Days of the week had different loads. For example, Friday and Monday were set aside for restorative intimacy, while Wednesday was for testing trust. Psychologists involved in the analysis note that this systematization, coupled with an emotional fixation on his partner, indicates the development of a closed, autonomous model of interaction, lacking external support. The recovered audio files from the tape recorder contain recordings of Marlene addressing Tanya, even in her absence, commenting on their recent arguments and incomplete acts of intimacy. These monologues contain phrases that indicate a sharp decline in self-esteem and an anxious fixation on his partner. Tony, in turn, began showing signs of fatigue from the stress. A performance review from February 2008 noted that she became withdrawn, irritable, and fatigued. Her supervisor described instances in which Tony would arrive at work with scratched and bruised hands. She attributed these to a fall in the bathroom. However, according to forensic examination findings, several of the injuries were consistent with entrapment and pressure, which are not typical of domestic incidents. It was established that by March 2008, Marlene had been systematically restricting Tony's social contacts. Specifically, she called Tony's work phone throughout the day, inquiring about her social contacts and making comments about her appearance and clothing. Analysis of Wi-Fi router data revealed that Tony had a remote access system installed in her home, allowing for passive surveillance of her laptop. The prosecution viewed this as a form of covert surveillance, although the defense insisted on voluntary consent. The intimate aspect of the relationship persisted until the onset of open conflict. Analysis of device footage shows that their relationship remained regular, 3 to 5 episodes per week, taking into account planned roles and preferences. Erotic material filmed by both parties was also discovered, including scenes of sex and voiceover monologues, indicating mutual consent. At the same time, anxiety in both participants increased. Marlene exhibited psychosomatic reactions, insomnia, nausea, and hysterical fits, recorded on the clinic's answering machine. During this period, Tony visited a doctor complaining of palpitations and headaches. Neither sought psychotherapy, but collected medical reports confirming a state of nervous exhaustion. In May 2008, Tony attempted to spend a few days apart, traveling to another city. This move, according to investigators, marked the beginning of the next phase, a phase of escalation, emotional pressure, and direct conflict. Over the course of these days, Marlene sent her over 60 messages and 17 voice calls, several of which contained threats, requests, and accusations of betrayal. An analysis of the tone and vocabulary allowed experts to classify this behavior as an emotional attack, which bears the hallmarks of pathological attachment. By the end of spring 2008, the structure of the relationship had been disrupted, trust had been eroded, intimacy had become a control mechanism, and emotional dependence had become a source of conflict. All of these factors would be directly related to the events that occurred on the night of the crime. Since the summer of 2008, the relationship between Marlene Brown and Tony Stanton has been clearly destabilizing. Marlene's emotional dependence had transformed into a behavioral obsession, which, according to investigators and specialists involved, became a critical factor preceding the crime. During this stage, the intimate element remained, but was increasingly accompanied by elements of pressure, testing, and control. According to the collected data, Tony began attempting to distance herself from Marlene. In June, she temporarily moved in with a cousin in Eugene, citing exhaustion. However, during this same period, Marlene regularly visited her home, leaving flowers, notes, and intimate items. These actions were documented in complaints filed by residents of a neighboring building with the local police department. Also around this time, Marlene began keeping an observation diary, documenting each day of Tony's absence, her movements, clothing, and external signs of fatigue or irritation. This diary was seized during the search and added to the case file. In email correspondence recovered from deleted messages, researchers identified an increasingly aggressive tone. Intimate expressions alternated with accusations, calls for repentance, and attempts to restore spiritual and physical union. Marlene also made demands to rehabilitate and hinted at the possibility of physical self-harm if she refused. A tone analysis of the emails was conducted by forensic psychologists. Signs of idealization of the partner were found, abruptly shifting to devaluation when control was lost. From August 2008 onward, sexual encounters, judging by the recorded material, became ambivalent. On the one hand, they continued, including overnight stays, visual encounters, and the exchange of photographs. On the other, they were accompanied by subsequent feelings of guilt, resentment, and accusations. According to audio fragments from the tape recorder, Marlene perceived sexual intimacy as a commitment and a confirmation of loyalty. Deviations from the established script were perceived as humiliation. Video recordings were discovered showing women engaging in recorded interactions, including the use of repetitive lines, memorized movements, and paraphernalia. A forensic psychological examination indicates an element of ritualism. This could have been an attempt to maintain the illusion of stability and control. According to the investigation, this phase demonstrates the transition of intimate life from a voluntary state to a fixed ritual, losing its emotional spontaneity. Tanya's behavior began to noticeably change. She stopped attending social events, limited her social circle, and refused to visit relatives. The school administration where she worked noted a sharp decline in activity, late arrivals to shifts, and signs of emotional exhaustion. According to personal notes found in a dumpster, she kept unstructured journals containing phrases expressing ambivalence toward her partner. Declarations of love alternated with expressions of fear and feelings of suffocation. During this period, Marlene increased her level of control. She had access to Tony's laptop, email passwords, and phone contacts. The investigation is also examining the connection of a hidden GPS tracker to Tony's car. The device was found after Marlene's arrest. The defense claimed the installation was for security reasons, but the court ruled it a form of unacceptable surveillance. An incident was also uncovered in which Marlene showed up at Tony's workplace with personal belongings, including intimate items. This incident became the subject of a memo from the school administration. That same day, Tony checked into a private clinic for the first time, reporting anxiety, insomnia, and obsessive thoughts. Despite their deteriorating general condition, the women continued to sleep together sporadically. A forensic examination confirms that they had sexual intercourse several times 3 weeks prior to the incident, as confirmed by biological traces recorded in the examination reports. However, according to behavioral experts, these acts bore the hallmarks of ritualistic repetition rather than emotional intimacy. At the same time, Marlene began recording audio messages in which she addressed Tanya in the first person even when she was absent. The recordings contained statements about omnipotent love, the need for fusion, and the unacceptability of betrayal. Some files showed signs of agitation, broken speech, illogical sentences, and repetition of phrases. Thus, by early autumn 2008, the relationship between the women had reached a point of complete dependence, mutual control, and psycho-emotional isolation. Intimacy remained as the last form of connection in which both participants still felt in control of the situation. However, the accumulated signs of anxiety disorder, the ritualization of contact, the violation of personal boundaries, and the suppression of autonomy led to an irreversible internal breakdown. According to investigators, the events leading to Tony Stanton's death occurred on the night of October 14 and 15, 2008, at 119 West Pine Street in Springfield, Oregon. That evening, according to neighbors, the lights in Tony's house remained on longer than usual, until at least 2:30 a.m. Witnesses also noted the absence of noise or screaming, ruling out outside interference or a struggle heard outside. The reconstruction of events is based on digital timestamps, crime scene inspection reports, forensic examination results, and the subsequent interrogation of defendant Marlene Brown. Beginning on the evening of October 14th, both women were in Tanya's house. 2 cups with wine residue, an open bottle of Pinot Noir, and a used plate containing an appetizer were found on the kitchen table. DNA analysis showed that both utensils had been used by both women. On the coffee table in the living room, investigators found 2 cell phones and a digital camera, from which they recovered 5 photographs taken between 10:48 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. They depicted fragments of the room, legs in dark tights, glasses, and intimate items of clothing. These images were later added to the case file as evidence of the absence of strangers and the confidential nature of the situation. Mobile device timestamps show no incoming or outgoing calls after 11:30 p.m. The last message sent from Tony's phone was dated 11:17 p.m. and addressed to an unknown contact. The message contained one word: busy. There was no digital activity between 12 a.m. and 1:45 a.m. At the scene, Tanya Stanton's body was found lying on her back, partially covered by a blanket. Her right arm was raised above her head, and her left arm was bent at her chest. A single stab wound was found in the lower chest, directed upward, penetrating the liver. According to the forensic examination, the wound was inflicted once, with a kitchen knife blade approximately 20 centimeters long. The wound proved fatal. Death occurred from massive internal blood loss within 4 to 6 minutes. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife with a wooden handle, was found on the bed, partially wrapped in lace fabric, previously identified as part of the victim's clothing. Only Marlene Brown's fingerprints were found on the handle. The accused was found sitting on the floor in the corner of the bedroom, naked, with traces of blood on her thighs, hands, and forearms. According to the police report, upon arrival, she was unresponsive and answered questions incoherently, repeating phrases. The medical team recorded no signs of self-harm. A breathalyzer test showed a blood alcohol level of 0.06%, which was below the threshold for loss of coordination. Marlene's first version, recorded at the scene, claimed an accident occurred during intimacy. However, she soon changed her story, citing an outburst of emotion and a jealous impulse. During questioning at the station, she stated that she felt fear of loss and a sudden urge to stop her forever. However, there was no admission of premeditation. Psychologists conducting the initial interview recorded a state of repression, fragmented memories, and elements of emotional dissociation. Items related to the women's intimate lives were also found in the room. 2 sets of underwear, erotic paraphernalia previously used, according to DNA analysis, candles, and lubricant. Experts concluded that the women had engaged in sexual intercourse before the tragedy, confirmed by both biological evidence and the characteristic arrangement of the bodies and objects. The forensic report placed the time of death at approximately 1 to 20, 1 to 40 a.m. The 911 call came in at 2:08 a.m. In the recording, Marlene was initially silent, then said, "She's not moving. I didn't know it would be like this. It wasn't evil." The operator dispatched a patrol which arrived 9 minutes later. A subsequent inspection revealed no signs of forced entry, struggle, or interference by third parties. All doors and windows were locked from the inside. A security camera from a neighboring building recorded no movement near the front door throughout the night. Footprints on the carpet and floor belonged to only 2 women. Thus, according to investigators, the crime was isolated and occurred amidst an acute emotional conflict within a complex and dependent relationship. The circumstances indicate a spontaneous yet physically motivated act committed in a state of intense emotional arousal. Immediately after her arrest, Marlene Brown was taken into custody at the Lane County Jail. She was charged under Oregon Penal Code 163.115, second-degree murder. From the very beginning, the investigation relied on the totality of the evidence, the absence of traces of third parties, no signs of self-defense, and the presence of a single targeted blow to a vital area. During the preliminary investigation, comprehensive examinations were ordered: psychiatric, forensic, criminalistic, and linguistic. The psychiatric examination confirmed the accused's sanity at the time of the crime, documenting pronounced signs of anxiety disorder, borderline emotional state, and pathological attachment, but no signs of psychosis or delusional disorder. During the pretrial phase, the defense insisted on recognizing the incident as a tragic accident occurring in a state of passion amidst an emotional conflict. An attempt was also made to qualify the actions as excessive self-defense, but this line was rejected by the court as the victim's body showed no signs of assault. The trial began on February 3, 2009. The hearings were open to the public. 19 witnesses were heard, including neighbors, colleagues, specialists, forensic experts, and medical experts. Audio recordings, correspondence, video materials, personal diaries, and crime scene photographs were presented as evidence. The prosecutor's office emphasized the motives of jealousy, control, cumulative pressure, and the transition from emotional dependence to aggression. The defense attempted to mitigate the context, citing the defendant's psycho-emotional state and the lack of prior intent. On March 12, 2009, the verdict was handed down. A guilty plea under Article 163.115, a sentence of 15 years imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than 10 years later. The court considered the lack of a criminal record, his age, and his admission of guilt during one of the interrogation stages as mitigating circumstances. The use of a weapon during his personal relationship with the victim was deemed a key aggravating factor. Following the sentencing, the case received lukewarm coverage in the regional press without national resonance. Both families declined to comment publicly. The house where the crime occurred was put up for sale a year later and changed hands. Marlene Brown is serving her sentence at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility.